If a man were called to fix the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would, without hesitation, name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus. Edward Gibbon in the History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, written in 1776. The Golden Age of Rome, the Pax Romana. Edward Gibbon called it the most happy and prosperous age of the human race, and we often probably do so too. We think about Rome in its zenith, its peak of power, prosperity, grandiosity, technological ability, architecture, and even population. From 96 AD to 180 AD, that is the time frame that Gibbon gives us, the human race was supposedly most happy. More generally, this period is extended and goes from the beginning of the reign of Augustus, the first emperor, until 180 AD. So about a 200-year period in which the Roman Empire had its best years. Especially we as people interested in the Roman Empire, who are fascinated by that time, therefore are very prone to think that it indeed must have been a wonderful time to be alive. A grandiose, happy age in an advanced empire that had come to dominate a large part of the then known world. But was that really so? Was the Pax Romana really as golden as we think? Was life in that age really as wonderful as Gibbon believed? Rome in the 1st and 2nd century AD must have truly been an incredible sight to behold. If we could travel back in time and spend one day in Rome during its peak, we would be utterly amazed. We would be fascinated by the incredible architecture and monumental buildings that were being built throughout Rome in those days. Grandiose temples towering high on the 7 hills, huge columns, and even larger and more incredible baths. And those baths were free of charge. Everybody could go there without having to pay anything. One could relax in the different water pools, go to the sauna, or even lift weights in one of the many gyms. But of course also play some board games while chatting with friends. Then of course the games. Chariot races in the Circus Maximus, gladiator fights in the Flavian Amphitheater, or the spectacular animal hunts. And then theater plays in the impressive theater of Marcellus or of Pompeius Magnus. All the while, one could enjoy free bread because the grain ships from Africa were regularly embarking for Rome fully filled for the pleasure of its citizens. And of course, clear, fresh water brought from far away, so that nobody ever had to be thirsty, no matter if rich or poor. Or you could also visit one of the many temples, one more impressive than the other, and marvel at the grandiose statues and artworks of a craftsmanship and level of detail that we wouldn't believe, while breathing in the scent of incense. In the many streets, lively activity, many shops, merchants selling wares from faraway lands, exotic spices, materials, cloth and garments. And we would not only see such scenes in Rome, but in many other cities throughout the Roman Empire. In Arelate, Lugdunum, Alexandria, Antioch, and even in faraway Londinium or Volubilis. In every larger city you could find baths, an amphitheater, aqueducts, shopkeepers and merchants. So at first we might think that indeed these must have been the happiest of times, a grandiose and golden age of humanity. But as so often, it depends of course with what we compare this. Do we compare this with the late Western Roman Empire? Then yes, certainly these were much better and happier times. Do we compare this to 536 AD and the following plague? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. These were then absolutely far better times. Do we compare this to the Black Death of the 14th century? Well, then these must have been indeed the happiest times of humankind. But what if we compare it to today? Well, then it might surprise you if I now say, even as a Roma Boo, that you probably wouldn't have wanted to live during the Pax Romana, if you could choose between that time and ours. But why? Didn't I just list quite a few amazing things that one could have witnessed in the 1st and 2nd centuries? Didn't I just say how utterly beautiful it must have been at times, especially the incredible architecture, art, and the Roman way of life in general? Yes, and still, you probably wouldn't have wanted to live there. And if you are like me, a total Rome nerd, or Roma Boo as some people like to say, and I think that you are, or else you probably wouldn't be watching this video, then you might be interested in the incredible rings and other Roman accessories which the SPQR Shop is building. They make legionary rings, they make rings with different themes, they even make coin replicas, statues, pendants, attributes and terracottas. And the most incredible thing is that they handcraft every single piece. That's right, this is really high quality handcrafted material. There's really no better present for yourself or someone you know who might be a Rome fan. I put the link to their shop in the video description and into the pinned comment, and with this link you can now even get a 20% rebate for every purchase. I repeat, a 20% price reduction for every purchase from the SPQR Shop, which is just an absolutely insane offer, and you can only get it here via the Maiorianus link, because let me tell you, the people from SPQR Shop also are absolute fans of the heroic Emperor Majorian. So go and check out their incredible assortment. There will be certainly also something for you. Pax Romana should be considered a very, very relative term. Pax meaning peace. In fact, upon closer inspection, there is not a single century of Roman history without civil wars, or wars in general, against foreign enemies. In the 1st century AD alone, which is considered to be in the Pax Romana, there were 30 major uprisings, rebellions, wars, battles, bloody losses, usurpations and other brutal battle-related events where many tens of thousands of Romans were brutally killed. From 3 AD to 89 AD, there are 30 such instances. And even in the more peaceful years that followed, there was almost constant warfare. Many thousands of Romans died in Trajan's conquest against the Dacians and Persians from 101 to 106 AD and in 115 AD respectively. Yes, the Romans were victorious, but the price to pay for these impressive victories was always to be paid in Roman blood. Then there were the Jewish revolts of 115 to 117 and 132 to 136. And yes, then there was indeed a period of 25 years, only 25 years without bloodshed. Until then, a Persian war erupted again in 161 AD. And then not long later, Chatti and Chauki and then the Marcomanni and Quadi invaded the empire and sacked and devastated many cities in their way. So even in the Pax Romana, times of peace were absolutely rare, and a period of 25 years without a major battle was already extraordinary and very rare. And then in the mid-160s, the Antonine Plague arrived. If you would have lived in those times without the knowledge of viruses and bacteria, chances were pretty high that you would die from that disease. And if not die, then at least have the worst weeks of your life. Okay, but the wars, they only affect the soldiers. So what about a craftsman or a merchant or the wife of a rich aristocrat living in Rome? That must have been pretty amazing, right? Especially before the Antonine Plague arrived. Well, yes, the Antonine Plague didn't arrive until 165, but that doesn't mean that there weren't outbreaks of diseases all the time, with local epidemics popping up here and there, all over the empire. Going to the baths, what we imagine as this beautiful, leisure activity, was in fact very dangerous. there was no knowledge of disinfectants, and so the water was full of germs, all kinds of bacteria and viruses. Getting sick with some form of disease was a regular occurrence, and if you happened to not have a good immune system, then your chances of getting old were pretty low. One could have just died from a regular infection of a wound, or from getting an aggressive disease at the baths, and such trivial things. It is no wonder that the large cities of the Roman Empire were always, even in the Pax Romana, a net population drain. More people died there than were born, and this always remained so until the fall of the Roman Empire in the West. So basically, in the small time frame of maybe 60 years, from around 100 to 160 AD, when there were less wars and no big pandemics, one maybe had a slightly lower chance of random death. But make no mistake, random death would always be a constant companion that could always strike. Being 70 years of age was an absolutely impressive age by Roman standards, and one needed a lot of luck to reach 70 or more. Only those with excellent immune systems would make it. And please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or YouTube membership, because I really need your help in order to be able to continue this work on late Roman history. Without your support, I don't know how much longer I can continue this channel, because as you can imagine, the YouTube algorithm does not exactly push a niche topic such as late Roman history. Thank you very much. So yes, in the Pax Romana there were still wars, maybe just not quite as many as in the other centuries, and there were diseases. But apart from that, it still must have been utterly amazing, right? Well, yes, if you were not a slave. If you were not a slave, then maybe yes, especially if you would have been a member of the upper class, maybe a senator or any kind of rich state official. During the best of the Pax Romana, those almost 70 years from Nerva's reign until the arrival of the Antonine Plague, as a member of the upper class with a very good immune system, then yes, you might actually have had a very good life. But those were only a few % of the population who were so lucky. However, if you would have been a slave, then maybe not so much. You would have had basically no rights, and your slave owner could do with you whatever he wanted. And of course, being a woman was especially little fun, because as a woman, even as a member of the upper class, one had to give birth. This was expected. And giving birth, even during the Pax Romana, was absolutely very little fun. The probability to die in childbirth is estimated to have been as high as 2 to 3%. Nobody would fly if the chance of a plane crash was 3%. Yet these were the odds to die as a woman in childbirth. And so for women, it was very little fun, even in Edward Gibbon's happiest days of the human race. We mentioned slaves before, but now imagine gladiators. If you would have been of strong stature and happened to be one of those unlucky enough to be captured somewhere at the borders of the empire, maybe a member of some Germanic tribe, and then you are brought to Rome, and next thing you know, you have to fight and be a gladiator. Well, then you can imagine that you probably also would not have so much fun on average. Of course, you could be one of those lucky few that survived, that became superstars, loved by the masses and famous, and then the emperor himself would make you a free man at some point, such as indeed had happened from time to time. But that was the exception rather than the norm. Normally, you could just die from even a not too severe wound because of an infection. That was the harsh reality of a pre-antibiotic world. Many gladiators, of course, were trained professionals. Some even did this out of their own free will, seeking fame and fortune in the great arenas of Rome, but certainly not all of them, and many died there completely needlessly in this bloody spectacle. So now the list for whom even the happiest of times were not too happy is already surprisingly long. Women, slaves, gladiators, who were actually for the most part slaves, then also soldiers in the legions risking their lives for the empire, people going to the baths and risking disease, and in general members of the lower classes who just could not afford high sanitation and hygiene standards and therefore had to rely on the public baths for any form of hygiene, therefore being much more prone to massive germ exposure. All these people, who made up the majority of people, had not so much fun on average. But we actually even forgot another class of people who had even less fun. Criminals, or those who were considered enemies of the state. They were, of course, even in the golden age of Rome, executed in a very brutal manner, often in the Colosseum, executed publicly, for instance by wild beasts or other horrific methods of execution. So then we have to take the golden age of Rome and the Pax Romana with a grain of salt. We have to see it in context. Was it the golden age of the human race? Well, compared to the Black Death of the 14th century, maybe yes. Or compared to the Mongol invasions. Or compared to the Justinianic plague and the other great disasters of human history. It depends with what we compare it. But compared to our times, well, despite the occasional beauty that we would see, the magnificent temples, statues, art, baths, aqueducts, roads, and cities in general, despite that, life was a lot worse for the average Roman than it is nowadays, especially if we compare it to living standards in developed countries. There certainly still are, unfortunately, places on this planet where the Pax Romana would seem nice in comparison. But on average, most of us in developed countries wouldn't want to trade the life we have with one in the 1st or 2nd century AD. We also saw that even in the Pax Romana, there seldomly was a period without almost constant warfare or rebellions and diseases. So death was always very near even in the Pax Romana, and just bad luck was enough to end your life suddenly and unexpectedly. So therefore, we should see Gibbon's remark in context. Compared to some ages of humanity, he was right, and even compared to some places on earth today. But compared to others, it was really bad, even during the peak of Rome. Context means everything. That is true for how we see the golden age of Rome, but of course also for how we see everything in life. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. It is thanks to the amazing Patreons and YouTube members of this channel that I can continue making videos about the late Roman Empire. I really want to thank each and everyone who is supporting this channel in any form. And if you want to learn more about how brutal the big pandemics of the Roman Empire really were, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about how life in the late Roman Empire differed from life in the Pax Romana, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.